And we're back now with more resources for survivors of domestic violence. We want to make sure you have everything you need to get help, or if you know someone who is in need of that help, that's why we're here. And joining me now is Barbara Gibson. She's the Housing Services Director for the Women's Resource Center to End Domestic Violence. Barbara, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
This issue obviously extends beyond what we were talking about, where police officers are primary aggressors. That's the focus of our series. But really what this comes down to is several women and men who are survivors of domestic violence, who are still essentially trapped in that situation. What can you say as an overview of what steps to take? So if someone's in this situation, what's the first thing they should do?
Yeah. Thank you so much for that question. One of the first things that we want survivors to recognize is that they are not alone in the experience of experiencing domestic violence. And so when you're going through this, it can feel like I'm the only one. And of course, it is very deeply personal. It's happening to me. It's a person that I have trusted, I have shared my life with, maybe my dreams and my hopes with. But it's also true that although it's an individual experience, it's also a largely cultural problem. We live in a community, in a world where domestic violence, violence in general, is an option. It is on the table. And so it's not a personal flaw. It doesn't mean anything about you or how you are showing up in the world, how you are showing up in the relationship. And so first, letting yourself be free from any sense of shame, there's something wrong with me, and then recognizing that there is a community of people who are available to offer support. So, for example, the Women's Resource Center has a 24-hour crisis line. If you live in another county, another part of the state, there are statewide coalitions, and there are places, regardless of where you are, that you can reach out to for support.
That makes sense, and it's also what you talked about is how the lives are intertwined. We're not just talking about if you're victimized, if you survive any other kind of crime, you can turn to your family for help. But if your family is the problem, or if that family dynamic is the issue, it's incredibly hard to extract yourself because the people you would turn to for support may in fact be the abusers, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's such an important point because when we think about leaving a relationship where there has been violence, we're thinking about leaving not just the things about the relationship that we don't like, we're also thinking about leaving the things about the relationship that we do like.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about a person that we have shared our life with, perhaps we share children with, we share a home with. And if we're talking about leaving the relationship, we're leaving our home, the things that we like about our home. We know that's a part of our regular routine, the place where I drink my coffee in the morning, the thing I really love about my bathroom, my neighbors. I'm having to remove myself from my entire life, my children from their routine, the school that they go to, if I'm needing to flee domestic violence. And the other piece of that is that this family member has many ways of showing up in the world. And so it's not just that they can be difficult, that they can be violent. They also have a part of themselves that's very kind, very loving, very supportive. And so I know more about you than just the fact that you have harmed me. You are also the person that maybe rubbed my feet when I was pregnant. You are the person that I share special jokes with. You are my person. And so that's the part that feels particularly painful. You are my person, and I am having to acknowledge to myself that I don't feel safe with you, my person. And so walking away from you means walking away from not just violence, but I'm also walking away from a sense of comfort, a sense of my routine. And there's a lot of stigma involved with that, especially if I'm a parent. Maybe I don't want to parent my children as a single parent. Maybe I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to pay the bills by myself because we share these expenses. Maybe we share a car together. Maybe we are saving up for something and we're trying to figure out, who's going to get the house, who's going to get the savings. It's really, really complex, and there are so many threads that have to be untangled when we think about leaving a relationship that there's violence. And then on top of that, there's the issue of when I leave, I'm more likely to be in danger. I sometimes may feel safer when I'm in the home because I can see what this person is doing. I can interpret what their mood is. But when I leave, then I really don't know. And of course, we know that leaving is often the most dangerous time. We're
Yeah.
talking about power
Right.
and control. And so often, when I remove myself from the control of the person who's causing harm, I am more likely to be harmed because the person has to ramp up their control, their power over me to get control over me. So it's very complicated, and it's really hard for people to understand this.
And then the consequences, though, of not leaving can literally be deadly. We looked at cases involving police officers where we have the text messages from women who are now dead. They were the
Yeah.
wives of these abusers. And the text messages to their friends are, hey, I'm leaving him, and that, no, I can't leave him. Or I left him and now I'm back with him. And so there's this sort of cycle, isn't there?
Yeah.
And then there's also the cycle of sort of abuse and then apology. And
Yeah.
this returning, maybe returning to, as we've said in one of the stories, a future killer. You're going back into the situation that could end your life. And this is why it makes that decision to leave so critical, because it literally could be a life-saving decision.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so I was making the point before that when we leave a relationship, we leave things that are familiar, and that can be really hard to give up. But I think when I think about survivors and domestic violence, what's most difficult to give up is that sense of hope that things are going to be better. And so if you are caught in that cycle, there's been this really difficult, explosive episode. This person has caused me harm. Maybe it's physical harm, maybe emotional harm. This person has caused me harm. And so there is that apology often. There are promises. I'm not going to do it again. I'm going to work with this person. I'm going to get some help. I love you so much. Let's keep our family together. You know me. You know I really don't want to be this way. Please help me. Stay with me. And often survivors do see themselves as a person who can love them enough to help them be better. I can hope hard enough. I can pray hard enough. And as I do, I can believe that things are going to get better. And one of the things I often say to survivors, and this can be really difficult, is that we can't let ourselves be led away from the truth by what we would like to believe. So yes, the hope is there. We want to hold on to the hope. And at the same time, we have to keep open this space, this idea that I might leave and come back, leave and come back. At some point, I might need to close the door permanently because my life may depend on it.
Wow. And then you also have the potential for escalation, right? I mean, it's not always the case, but because we don't want to paint with too broad a brush. But isn't it often the case where it starts with arguing, then leads to pushing, then may lead to, serious physical harm, and then to weapons, and then to murder, right?
Yeah, that can often be the case. And it's sort of like there's a line in a relationship, and once you cross that line, it becomes often easier and easier to cross it. And so in the beginning, you might, say something kind of off, or you might do violence that doesn't leave a mark. But then over time, yes, the violence can wrap up. That sense of you can't go anywhere unless I say you can go anywhere, or I'm going to harm you, you're going to be in the hospital. A lot of these things have happened. I've certainly talked with survivors who have been in the hospital for days or been in the hospital with injuries and needed treatment. And then there's this, again, sense of hopefulness that things can get better. This is a person that I've created a life with, a person that I have hopes with, and I know more about you than the fact that you have caused harm. And that's the part that I'm holding on to. That's the part that I'm going back to. I'm not going back to the person who has harmed. I'm just trying to recognize that the person that I share my life with is also there. And it's really hard. I can't emphasize that enough. It's really hard to let go of that person.
One thing I noticed reviewing these cases, and actually cases throughout my entire 3-decade career, is that very often the survivor is calling police. Police get there, and then the survivor is begging the police not to arrest the abuser. They are changing their story.
Yeah.
I'm not in any way blaming the survivor of abuse for this. It's part of the psychology and the victimology, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's so complex. So, of course, it's really difficult to talk about what's happening to you in a public way. There's a lot of shame and stigma associated with domestic violence. This person that I have invited into my life is causing me harm. It's not some stranger. This is someone that I know, that I have chosen. And so I think there's a lot of shame around that. And then, when your partner is arrested, it's very difficult. It opens up this huge can of worms because then we have justice involvement around, now maybe my willingness or my ability to work is jeopardized. And maybe I need this person to help maintain the bills in the household. And then there's also this idea about how am I going to talk about this with my friends and family? How am I going to explain that this person is in jail, this person is arrested? And I've talked with many survivors who have been blamed by friends and family members. Why did you have my son or daughter arrested? Or when the person returns from jail, why did you do that to me? It's not really about often the behavior that caused the person to be arrested. It's often on the shoulder of the survivor to protect this person at all costs. And so if you do have the person arrested, then often there are consequences for you, financial consequences. You might have people in your community, family members, blaming you, not understanding what is it that you did. Why didn't you stand by this person? It's not as I keep emphasizing the saying this. It's not as straightforward as it seems.
And they blame themselves
Yes.
as well. I hate to talk about survivors in the third person, but they'll often blame themselves. And I've seen this. I've had people close to me who have been survivors of abuse, and there's this, what did I do to bring this on? Or I did this, and then there's this guilt. It's terrible to talk about that, but there's also emotional abuse, and then it's interesting. One survivor told us that very often the victim and survivor is seen as the primary aggressor when police arrive because they're hysterical, and the abuser is calm as a cucumber. Because remember, you told me this, that it's not about abuse, it's not about violence. Violence is a tool in a method for control. And then when the police arrive, in order to further control the situation, the abuser is often the calmest one in the room.
Right.
And the survivor is hysterical because they've just been physically attacked. And so the police are used to responding to the hysterical person as the perpetrator and the calm one as the victim. And so it creates this dynamic that it's incredibly difficult for everyone involved. And then it's also very difficult for police to determine who's the primary aggressor. I do want to ask you, and jump in any time because some of this isn't a question, it's more of a conversation.
Sure.
But is there something missing right now in the law nationally, or even here in Georgia, that would help you and would help survivors of domestic abuse to extract themselves from these situations and make sure they continue to survive both emotionally and physically?
Yeah, so much of what you said brings up a lot. One of the things I will say is we have really, our ideas around gender, I think, are a really important place to start. And so we have clear ideas about how cisgender men are expected to behave and how cisgender women are expected to behave. Or we have clear ideas about gender generally. And part of what can happen is when the police come, if the woman is the one who is, loud, or maybe and we'll say a man and a woman in a heterosexual relationship in this scenario. The woman is really loud. The man might have defense wounds, maybe scratches or something like that. And as you're saying, yes, he might even appear to be calm. And so what I think is that when the police arrive, the woman is almost punished for kind of stepping outside of her role. Women are supposed to be calm. Women are supposed to be docile. And so when you don't meet my expectations, whether I'm consciously aware of these expectations or not, then on some level I'm going to have a need to corral you or punish you in some way. I do think that's a piece of it. And I also think that it's a responsibility of law enforcement when they arrive to kind of track themselves. How am I being in this moment? How am I showing up in this moment? Because we really want to encourage them to create a space that invites the people who are involved in the situation to share what's going on. And part of that means talking with people individually. Part of that means being the kind of person who is easy to talk to, who has some understanding about the dynamics of domestic violence, so that you can have a conversation that lets the person know, I understand what's happening for you, I care about what's happening for you. And my intention really is to figure out how I can help people be safe. And if I'm the person who's causing harm, then how can I help you make different choices with your behavior? Because exactly as you're saying, domestic violence is a choice. Violence is a cultural tool. And I think what can be really difficult for survivors is that sense of blame that you were talking about. Because it's very confusing if this person is, happy-go-lucky with everyone else. They are the life of the party. They're kind. They're patient. They're able to talk things through with other people. No one else would imagine that this person has this kind of reactionary responses that the survivor sees in their home. And so that's where the blame can come in. Well, why is it that this person is not violent with the other people? Why is it that this person is only violent with me? And part of it goes back to what you were talking about. The person is violent only with you because people think about this as some kind of a private issue that's not really for the community to be concerned about. There's also the concerns around around gender expectations. It is, I have a right to control you. I have a right to your body. I have a right to your choices. I have a right to know about your whereabouts. And so it really is an issue around control and this secret permission that we give people, depending on where they are in the power dynamic, to exercise power over other people. And so I think it's really important for us to think about, and as law enforcement, as members of the community, it's really important for us to look at the situation without shaming, without blaming, but with an attempt to really understand that domestic violence is something that we can get rid of. It's not something that has to be a permanent feature of our culture. We can make different choices, and part of that is examining gender roles. And part of this is about thinking about how we can be with really big feelings. How can I be with myself when I'm angry? How can I be with myself when I'm frustrated? How can I be with myself when I'm embarrassed, I'm disappointed? Often we feel this big energy in our bodies and we move it through in ways that cause harm. And we really need to take a look at everything that we're doing. Really figure out how we can honor people as individuals, how we can bring our authentic selves to conversations, how we can listen to people, not with it all figured out, but with some curiosity. And again, figuring out how we can support people when they say they are surviving domestic violence, not saying, what did you do? But instead, how can I help? What do you need? What would it take to help you get safe? Because it's a really lonely thing to figure out, and it's very confusing. You can feel very isolated. And that's part of why survivors don't speak out, because survivors are blamed.
Barbara Gibson, thank you so much for joining us, and also for the work you do, because sometimes calling the police isn't the answer, because all they can do is bring guns and handcuffs in some cases. And what you're doing is, and that's not to blame the police. They sort of have one tool to deal with this, and we're talking about what happens the next day, and then the next week and the next month. And what you're doing is that kind of work. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, just to let survivors know again that you are not alone. Our crisis line is available 24 hours a day. That's 404-688-9436. And for those
Say
who
it
are,
one more time if you would, just so people can.
404-688-9436. We always have someone available to listen, to help you explore options, to help you think about a safety plan. There's always someone available. And so also, too, for people who are causing harm, there is a way that you can get help. You can work with an agency called Men Stopping Violence, and I just mentioned men, but I know that all kinds of people cause violence. Help is available, so call. You can also call the Women's Resource Center and let us help you figure out how you can stop causing harm.
Barbara Gibson with the Women's Resource Center to End Domestic Violence, thanks so much for joining us and continuing this excellent work that you're doing to quite literally save lives and save families.
Thank you so much.